Short of him being revealed to have been mind-controlled to be an asshole by Vecna for the entirety of seasons 3 and 4, there was nothing that could save Mike Wheeler from the character assassination the Duffer Brothers did to him. So basically, I was going to do a video on Steve. I'd scripted a video on Steve. I'd prepared the video. I was ready to do the video on Steve and why he's an amazing character, why everyone loves him so much, instead of just a character analysis. Like, why is he so compelling as a character? But then we're working on my Nancy video. I realized how many parallels there were between Mike and Nancy in terms of the destruction and the lack of care for the writing. And then I started thinking about how this connected to Jonathon's character arc, and I was connected to the other guys sort of abandoned any character development whatsoever, even Dustin. And basically, Mike became a lot more interesting to me as someone who tends to obsess over character arcs and character analysis, and someone who really enjoys like exploring that. So that's how a video on Mike got born, and a really long script for it. So I'm going to try my best to keep this to a reasonable length. I'm going to try to make sure this is under an hour. Emphasis on try. So to put it simply, overall, the character destruction of Mike Wheeler is quite different from Nancy's destruction. It's not a slow lack of care and an obvious distaste for the type of character that they were originally writing. No, Mike wasn't ruined by bad writing. He was actively destroyed by every single writing choice that the writers made from season 1 onward in any imaginable way. Mike Wheeler became a caricature of a character in the worst ways possible, to the point in which, issues with it or not, I can safely say that the entire cast of the Star Wars sequels had better arcs in the equivalent time of the first season than Mike or most, if not all, of Stranger Things male characters. For one very simple reason. They had attempted arcs. They were bad, but they were attempted. I conspiracy theoried my way, as I analyzed these characters, into believing that the Duffer Brothers never actually wanted to give people character arcs, and in this video we're going to explain why. Before we get into it though, hi, my name is Rowan. I like talking about movies and TV shows and media analysis, and usually character arcs. Character arcs are one of my favorite things. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to see me post a chaotic video discussing something related to literature and or media and or characters in fiction once a week. I'd also love to hear what you all think in the comments, because I know Mike's character is a very contentious one and a lot of people have very strong feelings about it. And I would really like to hear if anyone has any counterpoints or other input that they think was a reason that Mike's character was so destroyed, or why Mike's character had so many problems in the first place. I would really enjoy that. Also, before we begin, I would like to clarify, I have not watched the documentary. A lot of people were commenting on my Nancy video about the documentary and about like, oh, you should watch the documentary. You should, like, that totally connects us. Filming this and writing this script, I have not watched the documentary. I am not basing this analysis on what the writers have said or their interviews. I haven't seen a lot of them. I am basing this on a textual analysis of how I have analyzed Mike's character, and you'll see also Jonathan's character, and the overarching writing of the show. I am not analyzing what the writers or the production have said about the writing of the show. I am analyzing the writing itself, because in my history of shows that ended badly, and usually writers try to save face and try to go, oh, I had this plan from the beginning, when they usually didn't. Key examples of this being most CW shows, most network television shows, and most of the things that Netflix has canceled before they actually got good. That said, let's get into it. Before I go through Mike's sort of like the different roles Mike has played in the story, I want to establish a couple working details that I am using as a framework for this analysis. First off, I am exploring this through the lens that in season 1, and structurally based on what I assume would have been the writer's original plan, Mike Wheeler is the protagonist. He is supposed to be, in season 1, from my analysis, the main protagonist of the show. Not a hero. I'm not calling him a hero. The hero's journey, we'll discuss heroes later, but Mike was the protagonist. He is our central perspective character through the lens of which we see the world. Now, I said in, I think probably my season 5, volume 3 video, that there's an argument to be made that Hopper and Nancy were also prospective protagonists in season 1, and I don't doubt that. But objectively, from the way of the framing, from the writing, Mike in season 1 is our prospective protagonist. He is your central character. Even in an ensemble, you usually have a prospective character, and that is Mike. Next, Mike Wheeler has never had a truly consistent character arc. At least not blatantly. We'll get into it in certain seasons. He definitely had closer to a positive change arc than others, while in a specific season or two, he was flat. And in some seasons, he seemed to have had a fall arc between seasons and become a jackass, and we weren't talking about it. But I digress. And lastly, I want to be really clear here. Mike Wheeler did not, in theory, need a character arc to be a good character. Characters can have flat arcs. They do not need to grow and change. They do not need to become worse or become better. They can simply be. However, as we will get into later in this video, considering how he was written, his flaws, the way that the story was set up overall, the lack of Mike turning from a flawed and nerdy kid into a strong and confident leader, or anything resembling it, is partly why he has major character problems. Not the only reason, but it is part of it, the structural design of the show. And we'll get into the structure of the show. Don't worry. I haven't gotten into the structure of the show as much, but we will. I'm going to start with a brief summary / analysis of Mike's role in each season. In Nancy's video, I sort of went through her character arc and her character growth and changes and the way things were ignored or developed. That's not possible for Mike. Mike, as we will see, has had a specific role within the overall plot of the show, and his character has shifted depending on the role necessitated by the plot, not by the natural progression of a character's personality. And so by showing his role in the overarching story and these sort of singular changes, it helps to illustrate overall the tone of his character and why that tone seemed arbitrary a lot of the time. And I think the main crux of, again, Mike's role changing to fit the plot instead of the plot changing to fit the characters is a critical writing flaw of Stranger Things overall. The characters shift by the seasons, not based on what is best for their character, for their development, for a compelling narrative that combines character motivations with plot consequences, but based on a plot that needs to play out in a specific way and characters being played like, I don't know, D&D roles to get to those plot places. And this will come back into play later. So season 1 Mike basically boils down to his major role being that he's nerdy and bullied in the beginning, and by the end he's become a determined leader who can stand up for himself and his friends. Though they kind of push him to standing up to the bullies mid-season. Like, it's weird. The structure of an 8-season television show puts limitations when you have this many characters. And I'm not getting into that today. Mike's overall role, and in theory, his character arc in season 1, is of a hero. A scared to brave hero. A classic hero's journey. Except he doesn't actually go through any of the steps of the hero's journey. For more specific details, this chart. Because of this, however, Mike is positioned as a somewhat more simplistic variant of a hero. Again, he goes from scared to strong. That is still a positive change arc. He has developed the ability to stand up for himself, although he doesn't really stand up for himself. His superpowered bestie does. His role in the season is of a protagonist. We see everything through his eyes. He is the motivating factor that goes searching for Will. He tells his friends we should go searching for Will. He's the one who finds Elle. He's the one who wants he wants to protect Elle and help her and keep her safe. This is part of the story. His devotion to both Will and Elle is a positive character trait. It shows him as a leader, as a friend, as someone who's devoted to his principles and the people close to him. And he even makes up with his friends after arguments, showing maturity for a 12-year-old. Was he 12? He was 12 in season 1, I think. Yeah, he was 12 in season 1. This is an important detail because this shows that in season 1, Mike was being set up to have a character arc. He was being set up to go from a scared kid to a strong leader. And that is the role that he plays in season 1. That is the role that he should have continued to play as the tension escalated and the conflicts rose and the story progressed. But then we get to season 2 and the cracks begin to show that the writers don't actually care about giving their characters compelling arcs, They only care about getting from plot point A to plot point D. I bring you Mike in season 2, protective and helpful friend with basically no evaluation of his actual feelings. Yes, he is still sort of the protagonist. The thing is, by season 2, the structure of who are we actually supposed to be following and rooting for has reached peak, and it's become more of a pure ensemble like Downton Abbey. A show in which there is no specific protagonist or perspective character, although Mike tries a bit in season 2. There's an argument to be made again for Hopper, again for Nancy, and again, I'd say even for Elle, but Mike is still he's hanging on there. However, season 2, like Nancy in most seasons and most writers in general, ignores Mike's trauma. It ignores the fact that he watched his friend Elle die. Because of this, and because of this problem, we reach a bit of a little loophole, okay, a little issue that I think is important to establish here. Stranger Things only addresses trauma when it has a purpose for the plot. Specifically in season 4, in which trauma becomes the literal way for the horrible demon monster dude to possess you and destroy your body and mind. This is a plot reason to establish trauma, but it is not a good integration of trauma into the plot through the way that characters interact with things. Mike, yes, in season 2, still thinks Elle is alive. He's constantly talking to her and trying to contact her. But aside from not wanting Max to join their group, nothing really happens that shows that Mike has trauma. There's no addressing Mike's trauma, and don't even think that Lucas or Dustin would have been traumatized by seeing their friend get taken into a weird portal in front of them, or by being almost shot at by adult soldiers. No, there'd be no trauma. They're only 12. They can't fully comprehend the horrors they've seen. The fact that this show is so obstinate to characters' traumas and is so ignorant to how they need to be played out is a major problem. It connects to this overarching theme of characters simply playing roles within the greater plot, and the writers seemingly not caring about how those character arcs play out. Which brings us to Mike's main real role in this season. Will's friend. That's really all he is. He's devoted to Will, and that is good. That is consistent with his previous character. But he doesn't actually do anything. Similar to Nancy in most seasons, Mike figures things out, tells adults who don't listen to him, and then he's proven right, and nothing seems to come of it. Mike figuring out that Will is possessed and Will is a spy could have been a compelling story if they bothered to tie it together more and not simply use it for shock value before the lab is breached. Mike had an attempt at a positive change arc, except the fact that he is simply proven right with minimal struggle and gets no setbacks and mostly only reward for being right shows that the writers of his character arc do not care about what is going on. Most specifically of all, they don't even care to address his relationship with Elle. He moons after her, she shows up, he briefly has an outburst to Hopper about the fact that he kept Elle away from her, but it's still never addressed. You can try and make an argument that this is depicting Mike's trauma, but it isn't. He is not being shown here to address his trauma. He's being shown to be a child having a tantrum. Which brings us, sadly, to his role in season 3, foreshadowed quite heavily by him and Hopper's conflict over Elle, even though Hopper and him seemingly make up over it. Because Mike's role in season 3 is obsessed with his girlfriend. That's it. That's his role. That is what this potential great story of scared to strong leader is reduced to in season 3. He's obsessed with his girlfriend. And just like it annoys me when women are reduced to only their boyfriend, it annoys me when male characters are reduced to only their girlfriend. This doesn't usually happen in non-heterosexual relationships in media, so that's why I'm specifying here, but it annoys me when it happens in non-heterosexual relationships too. When you reduce a character to only in love with their partner, and they have no character arc or barely any interactions outside of their partner, or even worse, the interactions they have outside of their partner actively relate to the fact that all of their friends are going, dude, you only ever hang out with your girlfriend anymore, what the heck? It's a problem. Now, I feel some people are going to try and defend this by going, oh, they were like 13, 14 at this point. It's totally natural for Mike to be obsessed with his girlfriend and not want to hang out with his friends. Hi, guys. Like with the Nancy video, I feel the need to use Max and Lucas as the shining example of any argument you have against most of the problems with reducing Mike and Nancy to their relationships. Max and Lucas are in a romantic relationship. They're in a keep on and off romantic relationship. They're still all friends. Lucas and Max hang out with everyone. They're interacting. They're enjoying each other's company and time. Lucas and Max, now say it with me here, are the exception to every defense you can have for, well, of course Mike only cared about his girlfriend. Because Lucas deeply cares about Max. This is true. But he still cares about his friends and interacts with them. Comparing Mike and Eleven to Lucas and Max shows you the writing problems surrounding Mike and Eleven. Shows you how Mike and Eleven's relationship, especially in season 3, was detrimental to Mike's character because his entire personality became he's in love with her. Because he's so focused on Elle, he actively neglects Will, which the show does show us. And he actively neglects Lucas and Dustin as well, because of course he does. This degrades his character, takes away his role as a leader, and pushes him from a protagonist to a secondary character at best. Honestly, season 3 doesn't really have a protagonist except Hopper, and if I didn't hate him so much, I would do a video trying to analyze why the heck he seems to be the main character in a show that was clearly about children and teenagers most of the time anyways. But worst of all, Mike became whiny and annoying, and a lot of people tried to pass this off of, oh, he's a 14-year-old, or oh, the acting. No, the writing actively made him whiny and annoying, which when we get to Season 5, Volume 1, I will establish they can write Mike not being an a-hole. They did it then, and they didn't need to make him a whiny, girlfriend-obsessed character in Season 3, but they did, and it was not good for his character. In fact, I would say it doesn't even classify as a flat arc. Mike just is there as plot dressing. He's there to have some small emotional problems, i.e. he can't express that he loves Elle and is bad at communicating because the Wheeler siblings are bad at communicating in their relationships. Watch out, Derek. Holly is gonna have some problems growing up. And the problem with this even more so is the fact that season 3 Mike could have been compelling. There was the potential. If they had actually managed to weave in his love for Elle conflicting with his role as a leader in the group and his role protecting and defending his friends, it would have been interesting. If there was a situation in which Mike had to make a choice between Elle and maybe Lucas or Will or Dustin or all three, it would have made for a compelling character conflict that could have led to character development. I'm going to pull in the Percy Jackson show as my example here because no one can stop me. In the Percy Jackson show, weird and unhinged as it may be, in the later part of its show's second season, which is currently airing as I film this, the show chooses to put more of a heavy emphasis on the fact that Percy, the main character's fatal flaw, i.e. thing that will probably lead to his death and suffering one day, is loyalty. And he verbalizes to the audience and his close friend slash future wife, Annabeth, that if he had to choose between saving Olympus, the, home of their godly parents, or saving her, he would burn Olympus down. Not he'd let it burn, he would actively choose to destroy a city of gods over losing a friend. Or in this case, true love. But I digress. That is a compelling character conflict. Percy being forced to choose between Annabeth and the world, a choice he literally makes in the next episode and chooses Annabeth, is a character conflict that he grapples with. Mike could have had to make that choice. He could have had to choose between Elle and the party, between Elle and Hawkins. But he didn't, because the writers didn't care about Mike having character. They cared about Mike playing a role in their overarching plot and getting Mike to specific scenes at specific times for specific reasons. This then, of course, brings us to the epitome of Mike being in specific places for specific reasons for almost no purpose. His season 4 role. He's still obsessed with Elle. Yeah, but like with a heavier dose of the Wheeler repressed emotion special. I mean, short of talking about how she's saying that he never says he loves her, but he's saying that he does, even though he never actually verbalizes the words. Parallels with Nancy and Steve's conversation in the bathroom in season 2, where she's like saying that it's all BS. Mike doesn't really have any role this season. He basically does nothing but ignore Will in favor of his obsession with Elle, badly express his feelings, and run around the desert for a few episodes. That's it. His only role is being in love with Elle. He has no other purpose. His devotion to her is extreme and continuous, to the point in which even the writers realized, yeah, they got nothing to do, and so they sort of just started writing them out of most of the episodes. Susie, Dustin's girlfriend, has more character depth in this season than Mike does, because at least she has the conflict of caring about Dustin, her religion, and her family. That is better expressed in about 5 minutes of screen time than Mike's, however long he had, but probably not a lot more than that, being just obsessed with Elle. As we've already established with season 3, degrading his character and his role as a leader to simply being obsessed with his girlfriend is a problem. It's not just a problem, it's horrendous. And I think in season 4 most, with Mike and the rest of the California gang, and we'll talk about Jonathon in season 4 later on in this video as well, you really get the sense that the writers did not care about creating compelling or consistent arcs. All they cared about was getting characters in the right positions for the right things. Characters don't do things logically. Characters do things based on emotions of grandeur. And yes, I did just say emotions of grandeur. Because to me, season 4 solidified the fact that the characters do whatever the plot requires to create grandiose, entertaining sequences. Even in Marvel or Star Wars films, even in more recent, less quality Marvel and Star Wars films in terms of writing, there is still a connection between emotion and action, between grandiose spectacles of CGI and heartfelt character moments. This is a key component of creating a compelling story. A key component that is lacking in Stranger Things because of the way that it frames everything. And we'll get to the way that it frames everything. But first we have to get to Mike in season 5. What role, my friends, do you think Mike plays in season 5? Yeah, this should be fun. To sum up, it's complicated. To clarify in vague detail, Mike's character is split between 4 versions. We have Volume 1 Mike, who vaguely returns to his original form of leader-ish, though again, no trauma addressed. His relationship with his friends has magically been fixed with no care, and that's about it. He's sort of a bit more devoted to Will, something that the show completely forgot about for the past canonical, 4 years, and that's about it. He doesn't really do much. He sort of plans, but it seems more like to parallel him and Nancy, which, again, him and Nancy, but that's about it. Then we get to Volume 2 Mike. When I was scripting this video, I got to Volume 2 Mike, I left it blank, and I texted multiple of my friends who watched Stranger Things Season 5 with me, and I asked them, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, what does Mike actually do in Volume 2? Because I can't remember him doing anything that has any purpose. And all of them replied variations of, OMG, you're right, he does nothing. Because Mike in Volume 2 doesn't even have the benefit of being obsessed with Elle or caring about Will. Mike in Volume 2 is just there. So many of the characters in Stranger Things Volume 2 they're just there. They aren't doing anything. They aren't focusing on anything. And Mike, worst of all, because Mike was just back to his leader position. Was it good? No, but it was an attempt. Was his trauma addressed? No, but they were doing something with it. And he just goes, and there's nothing to do. His mom saves his friends, and he talks to her, and he just sort of leaves. No, no emotional heart, no discussion of, don't worry, Mom, Nancy's okay. I'm looking at, I will get this, huh? Mike in Season 5, Volume 2 is empty. He's devoid. Then we get to Mike in Volume 3, discounting the epilogue. The epilogue Mike is its own problem. Basically, he does nothing. He talks with Nancy about nonsense that has no place, and it amounts to nothing, and he shoots the mind flare with the fire, the flare gun. Even his conversation with Nancy, it's devoid. Like, they have so many parallels. They have this consistent problem, born out of their family life, this inability to express their emotions, to express that they love their partners consistently. They're consistent problems with romantic relationships between the two of them. And instead, because you seem to be obsessed with them and their romantic relationships, instead of using a heartfelt conversation to deal with that problem, or to deal with Mike, or to deal with Holly, it just amounts to nothing. It amounts to to emptiness, to this just void of development, to this actual negative development points, because you have such little time and yet you are focusing on such meaningless nonsense. And this brings us, because again, Mike's technical last thing is he has that scene with Elle when she's doing her self-sacrifice. But here's the thing about that scene, and this connects to epilogue Mike. All it does is create a happy ending. Mike loses his girlfriend, spends 18 months dealing with that. No trauma seems to be addressed. He's just mourning her again, just like he was at the end of at the beginning of season 2. And just like he was at the beginning of season 2, he believes she's still out there and even convinces his friends of this story. And then he becomes a writer. A couple people commented to me that I didn't know what I was talking about on my Volume 3 video, because Mike being a D&D master turned storyteller makes total sense. I've played D&D. I have plenty of friends who play D&D. But my issue wasn't that he's a dungeon master, so therefore he can't be a storyteller. My issue is the fact that they have never set up the fact that Mike likes writing. Nancy likes writing. Mike liking storytelling and then becoming a writer are two completely different things. Nancy wants to be a journalist. She's been shown to write, to care about writing. Mike has been shown to only care about D&D. Simply turning that suddenly into he's a writer is a problem, because writing isn't just simply being a good storyteller. Writing is being good at characters and structure and prose, all of which are things that the writers of this show seemingly aren't. Mike somehow, for a reason I'm just speculating on, allegedly seems to be a self-insert for the authors. In this case, the showrunners. Weird that. Overall, Mike's character, and especially his ending, his unearned belief that his girlfriend just abandoned him to be free, and his sort of acceptance of it, and his interest in becoming a storyteller and a writer to retell these stories, has no connection to even the semblance of positive change that he received in seasons 1 and sort of 2. In essence, Mike's character is the perfect example of what I am going to call, in the case of Stranger Things, the Dungeons and Dragons problem. I'm not saying D&D is bad. I don't think that. I like D&D. I, again, like I just said, have played it. I've played it with my friends. I have friends who still play it. I'm also not saying, before I get into what I'm going to call the Dungeons and Dragons problem, that lit RPG or choose your own adventure are not valid forms of literature or valid forms of expression of stories. It is. I know many people who participate in, enjoy consuming, or create this type of story. That said, Stranger Things is not any of these things. Stranger Things is a show, a TV show with 8 to 9 episode seasons on a streaming service. Stranger Things, most specifically of all, is an overarching plot-based TV show that needs to match the structure of its medium. Medium, which most people like to ignore, especially in TV shows because they don't think it counts as a medium, is a critical piece of any given story and of the rules and conventions that a given writer has to follow when creating within that medium. And I'm sorry to say this to Duffer Brother defenders and the Duffer Brothers themselves, but in an overarching plot-based TV show within the medium, characters, some of them need actual arcs. They can't just work for the sake of the plot. That is called bad writing. Mike's lack of consistent character evolution and his character switching roles and necessity between each season, alongside the central focus in most of the later seasons on his relationship with Elle for, I guess, romance reasons. But similarly, as I've already said, like with your female characters, having your male characters only be obsessed with their romantic partner is a problem, creates a character with absolutely no consistency. He isn't even one-dimensional. I can't even call him one-dimensional. He's flat. He's lifeless. He is an avatar being moved around on puppet strings for the will of the writers. He is a character that does what the plot requires him, not a character who drives the plot. His flaws are not addressed. In fact, they're actively ignored. Mike ends the story, still mooning after Elle, imagining worlds where she lives, writing stories based on his traumas implicitly, and seemingly ending up successful and happy. For no reason! This similar problem is with most of the characters in the epilogue. And most of the character endings, happy as it may be that they all got to live happily ever after, isn't really happily ever after. There is no addressing their traumas, their conflicts, their positions within the worlds that they now live in. There is just, and I'm being very clear here, nothing. There is absolutely nothing addressed or dealt with about these characters. For no reason. Why? The Dungeons and Dragons problem in Stranger Things is not that it's based on Dungeons and Dragons, is that the writers, it seemed, just wanted to create a very high budget Dungeons and Dragons story playing out like their favorite arc from when they were kids. It's basically fan fiction, and someone's gonna yell at me for that, but don't tell me I'm wrong, because no, it couldn't be fan fiction, it's so different. Explain to me instead how the characters could have fit into the plot. I'm begging you, please, tell me, explain to me how the character decisions made had any purpose for the characters as entities. Explain to me how the writers had any care for any of their characters being complex. Please, I beg of you. If you can explain that to me in the comments, I will rescind my opinion, but please, someone try and think of how these characters made sense on their own. They don't. And it is therefore at this point that I wish to discuss how this lack of care for characters and how they fit into the overall narrative and how their actions impact the narrative, and of course, how this connects to them lacking specific development. This, my friends, of course brings us to probably the second most destroyed male character in all of Stranger Things, Jonathon Byers. So for Jonathon, to really emphasize my overall point about Mike's character being destroyed for the plot, I also want to explore how Jonathon's character wasn't even destroyed, more so ignored for the sake of his position within the plot that the writers seemed to wish to tell. In season 1, he is complex adjacent. He does not get the time to develop, but no one in this show really gets the time to develop. He has the implications of complexity and the potential for more growth in the future. His traumas are sort of addressed before we completely forget about his dad, deadbeat, never seen again. If I had a nickel for every time this show completely forgot it had a character, I'd have quite a few nickels. Anywho, Jonathon's love for Will is also a key component that is addressed in the early seasons, his devotion to his family, his wish to stay with them, and his feelings for Nancy. These are all components of his character. At season 3, there is again an attempt, an implication of plot relating to how his economic status in life is relating to his relationship problems with Nancy. But do you know what this entire season just ignores? His relationship with his family. Similar to, as I discussed in my Nancy video, in how most of her scenes become entirely devoted to either Jonathon or Steve or both in the later seasons of the show, Jonathan's scenes become, on the whole, devoted to Nancy, even when she isn't there. And again, I'm not counting ensemble group meetups. I'm talking about one-on-one individual conversations where you can get character work done. Jonathan's plot in this season is basically argues with Nancy, problems. He doesn't understand the sexism she's facing. She doesn't understand his economic issues. That's it. Because the writers focused so entirely on Jonathan's romantic relationship, they neglected his interactions with other characters. I'm not saying they shouldn't have addressed or made a story about his problems with Nancy. I'm saying that by focusing his entire plot on his romantic relationship and ignoring his friendships, his family relationships, etc., you have a problem. Because here's the thing, Jonathon doesn't have any friends. Let that sink into you for a second. Nancy also does not have any friends. Steve is shown in season 2 to be Jonathan's only other friend aside from Nancy. These three characters are almost entirely focused on each other. The fact that Steve has a new friend this season is important. And we know of this. We know from things that we've heard in the past that Steve and Robin were originally going to be in a romantic relationship before that Maya Hawke said, hey, I think this should be platonic. I've got this idea. Let that sink into you. The original intention was for Steve, instead of having a friendship, aside from his one with Dustin, once he'd gotten out of the obsession with these three characters only interacting with each other and only seeming to care about each other and only being in this tight little thing, was going to get another character for him to be in a romantic relationship with instead of having a built-up friendship, instead of having other interactions. Because for some reason, this show seems completely obsessed with just throwing everyone in romantic relationships and yet ignoring romance at the same time. They say they don't want it to be about romance, and yet so many of these characters become entirely centered on their romantic feelings for other characters. Entirely centered on it. There's no exception. Almost everyone, even Hopper and Joyce in seasons 3 and 4. Hopper's most of his motivation, aside from his annoyance and dislike of Mike, is focused on his feelings for Joyce. You said you don't want this to be a romance. I really want to just let this sink in for all of you. CW shows with romance subplots, the frickin' Vampire Diaries, has more friendship interactions than Stranger Things. The Vampire Diaries has more characters as close, platonic friends than Stranger Things. The Vampire Diaries, whose first 6 seasons are spent on an on-again, off-again, back-and-forth love triangle between 2 brothers and a girl, spends more time fleshing out that girl and those brothers' friendships with each other and the other characters in the show than Stranger Things does fleshing out Jonathon, Mike, Nancy, or anyone for that matter outside of Steve in terms of platonic interactions with other people following the show's first season. It's like these guys don't understand that people can be friends and not simply obsessed with their romantic partners. Sorry, that was a rant. I wasn't planning to go on that rant. That was off script. Anywho, season 4, Jonathon. What is his role? What does he do in season 4? He, he's high and he's got romance problems. That's it. That's all Jonathon does. That is his entire role in season 4. All of his scenes where he's not simply driving them around are focused on him and Argyle talking about his romantic problems. Case in point, my rant that I just went on. But season 5, Jonathon, I think, is the perfect example of, again, the Dungeons and Dragons problem. These characters being moved around for the sake of the plot, having nothing to do, having no consistent development. His scenes, once again, are almost entirely focused on either jealousy over Steve because of Nancy or Nancy. He doesn't seem to worry about his brother. Ignore, again, that meme about Joyce seemingly not caring about her eldest son and saying he should go into danger instead of Will. And that's basically it. His breakup scene with Nancy that was so confusing I thought they were actually engaged the first time I watched it is... it's fine, like whatever. It kind of talks about their issues, but still ignores them. It doesn't fully address the problems. Neither does his other scene with Nancy in episode 6. But weirdest of all, I almost feel like they were trying to redeem him. Like, specifically with how he saves Steve's life, and then him and Steve have a heart-to-heart and resolve Steve and Nancy's issues, with Nancy not even there, which... I ranted about that in my Nancy video. If you want to see my rant about that, go with the Nancy video. Jonathon, it almost seems like, needed to be redeemed for being a lacking character. He didn't need to be redeemed. He needed character. Jonathon wasn't a jerk because Jonathon was a jerk in seasons 3 and 4 because his writing wasn't fleshed out. He wasn't portrayed accurately. He wasn't given depth. He was where he needed to be for arguments or for character scenes. He was simply a tool of the plot to drive up tension and drama. He had no character consistency. But by trying to give him a redemption by having him sort of make up with Steve and this little mini him and Steve having problems arc is weird. Because here's the thing. Jonathon having issues with Steve wasn't a thing. It was a fan theory. Jonathon never had issues with Steve in season 2. They had made up. They were friends. Steve willingly let Nancy go to be with Jonathon, seemingly no hard feelings. In season 3, for that one scene where they all interact, there's no problems. Steve saves Jonathon and Nancy and the kids' lives in season 3. There are seemingly no problems between them. We jump to season 4. Again, Steve is suggesting that him, Robin, Nancy, and Jonathon all go hang out together. Steve seemingly still considers Jonathon his friend. The only hint or implication that Jonathon holds any issues or problems with Steve is that one line at the end of season 4 where he's like, ugh, Steve. For seasons 2 through 4, up until that line, Steve and Jonathon were portrayed and implied to have a cordial, even friendship-adjacent relationship. So why in season 5 were you then focusing on their enemies' bromance, their competition, their jealousy? Why are you focused on it? Even Steve, he's like, dude, why are you doing this? Nancy's my friend. I'm not actively pushing you. If you wish to read Steve's care for Nancy in this season as platonic, that puts even less weight behind Jonathon's care, which it seems like they were trying to imply Steve had platonic feelings for Nancy all season, which they're trying to imply again with the Jonathon-Steve scene at the end. What purpose does Jonathon's arc focusing on jealousy over Steve serve if, again, you're going to have him break up with Nancy and accept this, and then simply, Jonathon and Steve did not have to be enemies this season. There didn't have to be a Jonathon redeems himself by saving Steve and realizing his jealousy was pointless. There was no purpose behind it. It was simply there because the writers wanted it. There was no setup. There was no basis. It just was. And I'm not saying that scene in season 5, volume 1, where they're racing to the top of the tower wasn't funny, but it didn't have a purpose. It was funny with no reason. The best scenes, especially comedic scenes in dramas, are funny because they have a purpose. Now, again, hate to always bring it back to The Vampire Diaries, but it's a good example. That was a drama, a romantic drama no less. There was constantly romantic drama. There was also at least once a season a scene where a character in an almost fourth wall, tongue-in-cheek, winking at the camera kind of way went, this is an absurd entanglement we found ourselves in, or didn't you kill X person's mother who you're now in a romantic relationship with? Among other things. And those were the tamer ones. It was comedy that was funny because you, as the audience member, went, oh yeah, I get that. I understand the absurdity of this romantic entanglement tree of chaos. That is how you include comedy in a drama. You include scenes that are comedic, not simply because of the content or the timing, but because of the larger context of the work. And that brings us to the epilogue. That brings us to epilogue, Jonathon. Because if there is an epitome of scenes that do no contextual work but try to pretend they did, it is Jonathon's final ending in that scene with him and Steve and Robin and Nancy on the squawk. Now, when I first watched this scene, I had problems, but I could live with it. I was watching it, and I'm like, I can live with it, I can live with it, I can live with it. As I've returned to the scene later on, as I've analyzed it, as I've continued to think about it, I have started to hate that scene more and more for reasons I didn't even think I could hate it for. And I've reached the point where I think that's one of my least favorite scenes in the entire show. Jonathon, in this epilogue, is implied to leave Hawkins to go to NYU with no remorse or care for his family and become a film studies major who's apparently making anti-capitalist people-eating films? Sure. Okay. He is given a seeming dream ending for his character in maybe season 1. You could argue maybe season 2, but even season 2, he has more family connection. He has more care. He is a bit more family focused. He is also giving a character ending that actively goes against the reasons that him and Nancy's problem started in the first place, him not wanting to leave Will and Joyce in season 4 to go to college across the country. Hi guys, NYU is in New York. New York is about a 4-hour train ride from Boston, which is where Emerson is. NYU in New York is a bare minimum 6-hour plane ride from California, where his family used to live. And even if it's still in Hawkins, he'd still have to get to O'Hare from New York, which is a couple hours, and then get from O'Hare to Indiana, which is bare minimum a few more hours. Now, some people are going to make an argument, oh, but Joyce and Hopper are moving to Montauk. Hi, guys. Joyce and Hopper decide to move to Montauk in the epilogue. It is implied that Jonathon has already been at school for probably at this point a year by the time of the epilogue. The only semblance of character they tried to give him in season 4, this harkening back again to his connection, his devotion to his family, and not wanting to leave them, was entirely thrown away by the epilogue and seemingly this perfect happy ending where he gets to be his archer anti-capitalist self. Okay? And this ending did not resolve any of his conflicts, any of his problems. It did not connect with anything that had happened to Jonathon post season 1, maybe season 2. His entire character journey proves, like Mike, the Dungeons and Dragons problem. It proves that the Duffer Brothers did not care about consistency or character. They cared about plot and getting the things that they wanted. They cared about doing whatever they wanted, damn the consequences. And this isn't to say that writers can't do whatever they want. I am a firm believer that writers should be able to write the stories that interest them and explore the things that interest them. But do you know what good writers do? Good writers check their interests. They check their instincts. Good writers go, I really want to do this, but I can't. Let me think if there's a way I can, and if there isn't, I have to cut it. Because good writers know that in order to create an interesting and compelling story, they sometimes need to sacrifice things that they wanted to include or their original plans, because the characters have minds of their own. This is most prominent, I think, with Gardner writers, being writers who have a plan but deviate with their characters. The two most high-profile examples at the moment that I can think of off the top of my head are George R. R. Martin and Sarah J. Maas. Both of these are prolific writers with their own controversies and problems I'm not getting into today, who have said on the record about various things that they originally intended for X to happen but had to change it to Y. This can be as simple of a planned romantic relationship. Both of them have said they had planned romantic relationships that are going nowhere, to entire character arcs, to a side character becoming more important, to a character who might have ended up good becoming corrupted, to a character who was horrible becoming good. These are all things that change and shift as a writer sees what needs to happen for the sake of a story, as a writer explores what character consequences and actions need to result for their plot threads to be fully explored and expressed. This is something that the Duffer Brothers clearly did not take into account. The epilogue, the ending, it is an example of writers simply throwing in what they want to see and not cutting things that don't make sense. It is an example of writers who are so focused on the plot and the action and the cool, exotic set pieces that they do not care about character consistency. They care about characters being where the plot needs them to be. The problem with Mike and Jonathon really specifically shows to me how characters who I liked in seasons 1 and 2 slowly became my least favorite in the show. Because for me, even unless a character is someone I'm super invested in, as their writing quality declines, as they start making stupid decisions, as they start having no point or purpose, I lose interest. I don't care. I got to season 5 and I didn't care if Mike or Jonathon lived or died, because they were so uninteresting, because they were shells, they were avatars, they were self-inserts for the sake of the plot, whose only roles were to be obsessed with their romantic partners and to end up where the writers decided they earned a happily ever after, even though their endings did not address their clear traumas and flaws. The writers neglected to give them character arcs that made sense. Instead, they jumped from scene to scene to scene, from plot beat to plot beat to plot beat, and tried to make you fill in the gaps in your own mind. This is why I think Stranger Things, above a lot of other fandoms, has so many headcanons about characters' actually motivations. It makes it hard to fully analyze because you just assume or you think or you believe that this is the way of things. But it might not be. In fact, it probably isn't. By reducing Mike and Jonathon and a lot of the other characters down to simply their romantic relationships when outside of large group settings, you neglect to create three-dimensional characters. And like Nancy, they were lacking in depth and detail because their purpose wasn't to become anything. Their purpose was to be Dungeons and Dragons players, jumping from scene to scene with no real attention to detail given to them. This happens with most of the male characters as well. It happens with Lucas, whose entire plot is reduced to his relationship with Max. It happens with Dustin even, who, with that brief stint of the trauma over Eddie, is still sort of just reduced to smart planner. It happens to Hopper, whose entire focus post season 2 is basically just on either Joyce or Elle, and that's never fully addressed. It even happens to Steve. Steve, who objectively is the fan favorite. Steve, who the writers were still so focused on his romantic relationships in. Again, his scene with Eddie in season 4 focused on him and Nancy. His scene with Robin in season 3, focused while partly on developing his relationship with Robin, still came back to Nancy. Even though Steve got some development and arguably had the best character arc of the show, it still wasn't as good as it could have been because they still didn't address his PTSD or his trauma or how he fully existed outside of his romantic relationship with Nancy. Because this show is so focused on characters being where they need to be for the plot that it doesn't understand that characters should just be able to be. You should be able to know a character, take them out of a setting, put them in another setting, and still see their depth and development, to still understand where they're going and what they're doing. And that is the core crux of the issues with the show's writing. In conclusion, to sum up this long meandering video, Mike and Jonathon, alongside most of the characters in the show, can be focused almost entirely on the fact that the writers did not seem to care about consistency or development. They cared about shoving characters where they needed to be for the pretty spectacle. They cared about playing in their sandbox, like a Dungeons and Dragons game, while sadly neglecting the dimensionality and the potential of all of these interesting character concepts they created. If you want a moral or lesson from my exploration of why these characters are bad, writers need to study writing more. I don't care if you're a TV writer or you're a book writer or a film writer. You should study the different types of TV shows. You should study how TV show X connects to TV show Y. You should study the writing of TV shows and books, because studying structure will really help you, I promise. If you enjoyed today's video and my slow descent again into slightly less insanity than the Nancy video, please consider subscribing and liking the video for more. Also consider commenting if there were any other characters that you thought were particularly egregious. Who do you think is the worst character in the show? And I don't mean you hate them, I mean so bad. I really want to know. I think that'll be fun. And I hope you all enjoyed today's video and my exploration. If you're interested in more character analysis, drop some comments below about characters, Stranger Things or no, that you think are either badly or well written. I love doing character analysis. I think it's really interesting and fun. And who knows, if it's from a show I love, you might have given me an inspiration to jump right into it. I also accept book characters. I love book characters. They just take me longer to analyze because books are long. Shows are easier for me to catalog. Anywho, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Bye, everyone.